In this video, we're going to talk about functions in Excel, and then we're going to cover some of the basic ones, sum, max, average, min, and then we'll go into the count functions, and then in other videos, we'll treat individual functions like X lookup and if statements with their own videos. First, what's the difference between a function and a formula? So we've already been exposed to a formula. I can just take one cell and subtract another cell. And obviously, I can make the formulas as sophisticated as they need to be. I can put parentheses around things. I can then divide by something and square it. You can then add it to, and obviously these things can get as complicated as they need to be in order to solve a problem. This is a formula where I'm just referencing cells. Hit escape on the keyboard. Let's go talk about function. So a function is a named calculation where an output is based on the input provided. And Excel has hundreds of built-in functions. Now these functions will take an input, usually cell references or named ranges or arguments, and we'll talk about that more. There's a syntax to them. You have to type them just right or they won't run. And they all have the same syntax in that they will start with an equal sign. They will always have an opening parentheses, and they will always need a closing parentheses. What you put between the parentheses will vary based on the function you're using. So function categories. In Excel, you have financial functions, logical, text, date and time, lookup and reference, math and trig, statistical, engineering, cube, information compatibility. If you go to the formula ribbon, you can see these categories. If you choose a drop down, you can see all of the functions within that category. In this class, we'll just be learning a few functions from each of the different categories, but what makes Excel so powerful is just the volume of functions that are available in the entire program. You can fill out your function by using this dialog box. So depending on the function you're looking at, in this case it looks like the PMT function for calculating the payment, it's going to show you what are the inputs required. Now, if it's a required input, it's going to be in bold. If it's an optional input, it will not be in bold. As you put in the values, it will show you what they are, and at the very end, it will show you the result. For every function, what you need to know is what does it want, what are its inputs in order to do its job, and what is it going to return? Is it going to return a number, a piece of text, or a range? And all of these, or both of these questions will be important once we get into nesting functions, where we put one function inside of another. And because of that, and you do it a lot in Excel, where you put one function inside of another, this dialog box is really problematic. So I encourage students not to use the dialog box if you can avoid it. So here's what I do instead. If you just type equal PMT parenthesis, well, first of all, if you just type equal PMT, you see it come up and it tells you what it does. Calculates the payment of a loan based on constant payments in a constant rate. You're right, okay. Then you type your parentheses, and this tooltip right here is so important. It tells you, just like the function dialog box does, exactly what it needs. It needs the rate, it needs the number of periods, and we'll talk about this later in the course, but present value, and then the square brackets means optional. In the same way over here you have bold and not bold for required and optional. And then I'm just going to hard code numbers just for demonstration purposes, but if you put 3% and type a comma, watch what's happened. Notice how the rate is bold. That's because that's what I'm currently at. The minute I type a comma, the NPER, the number of periods, goes bold. So if I put a number in there and type a comma, the present value goes bold. And so then if I can just type a number in there, the other two things are optional, so I can close it up. All I need to do is click on any one of these to know I'm in the rate. If I click on the 10, that goes bold. Then notice I have a four-headed arrow. If this dialer or tooltip gets in your way, you can move it around or move it on top. But again, if I click on that, that's the present value. So this is what you want to use to type your functions. And here's the reason why. Let's say I want another function inside of here. Again, this concept of nested functions. So I type one that we haven't seen before called XLOOKUP. Well, guess what? Here's my tooltip again that tells me everything I need to fill out the XLOOKUP. And then when I'm done, if I come back out here, here's the tooltip for the payment function. That's what you do not get when you use the dialog box. So if I open the dialog box, there's all my things that I need for the payment function. But if in here, I'm going to use another function to look up the present value, boom, I have no help. So now I'm like, oh, what do I need to fill in for the XLOOKUP? I don't know. And that's why I discourage the use of the dialog box, because it prevents you from understanding what you need once we get into nesting functions. So enough about that. We'll talk about it in more detail when we talk about nesting functions, which will be a separate video. Let's go look at some of the most obvious functions. So I'm going to hit Control Home to go to the top of this spreadsheet. You may have seen this data before. If I want to add up the base salary, so I'm going to go hit Control down arrow, which will put me to the bottom of the data, 580 rows. And right down here, I can just hit the sum function. Now, there's a couple ways of doing that. The sum functions have a button that you can access, so where you can access the function, and it's right here in the Home ribbon, Auto Sum. First, if you just hit the face of that button, it will put in the sum function, and it also tells you, by the way, you can just hit Alt equal. First, we'll just hit the face. Boom. It grabs all 580 rows, and it's saying, hey, here's what I think you want to add up. And in this case, it's right, so you can hit Enter. And now you've just added up all of that data. I'm going to hit Delete and show you that if you just hit Alt equal on the keyboard, it does the same thing. Enter. Another way, I won't go into too many ways because that online training hub video will talk about a lot of tips and tricks around this. But the other thing I want to mention is, okay, there's the face of the button, but then there's a drop down arrow because we may not just want the sum. Obviously I can hit it here, and I've just done the sum one more time. Okay, but I can also, I'm going to hit Delete, come over here and say, I want to know the max value or the min value or the average value out of the base salary. So I can now click that, and it'll fill in the average function. When you first hit those, notice you had those marching ants. So one more time, I'm going to hit the sum. The marching ants are guessing what you want to add up, and very often it guesses correctly, but sometimes it doesn't. So right here is the total of all of those salaries. What if I want to find the largest salary? So I run over to this button and type max, or hit the max button. Well, I don't want the total to be calculated in with the max, because obviously the total would be the largest number. So if I hold down the Shift key and just click up one, then it'll just be F2 to F580 at that point. So once in a while, it's going to guess wrong, and you have to adjust it. And then I'll hit Enter, and now I have the max salary that doesn't include the total. Same thing would happen if I run down here and decide I want to do the min. What's the smallest salary? Well, it's going to grab everything, including the total and the max salary. So in this case, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and just click right there. And now I can ignore those last two cells. Very often, rather than at the very bottom, you might be summarizing your data in a table off to the right or left or at the top of the data. And so if I want to, now I'm going to type the sum, I could hit the sum button. I guess I'm just such in the habit of typing it. So I hit the sum button, and it's okay, well, I can't guess what range there is. I don't see any numbers around me. And so watch this trick. I'm going to click on F2, hold down the Shift key, and then Control down arrow. And it's grabbing all of the data, except it's grabbing 3 pieces of data I don't want. So now I'm holding down the Shift key and only going to 580. And now I'm going to hit Enter on my keyboard. And that puts me back up here with the largest salary, or to the total salary. Now, if I want to calculate the largest salary, by the way, I'm going to go and delete these numbers so we don't run into that issue again. I'll run back up. If we want to get the largest, I can go equal max. Again, I'm always so used to typing functions. I can go over to F2, Shift, Control, down arrow, Enter. I am done. And obviously, if I have 10,000 rows of data or 1,000,000 rows of data, that Shift, Control, down arrow is the quickest way to select them. I just type the min, Same thing, F2, shift control down arrow, enter. You get the idea. What if I want to know the salary range? What's the difference between the largest and the smallest? Well, here's the smallest, there's the largest. I could just subtract the two. So rather than just subtracting these two cells, the point I want to make is you can combine, I can take the max minus the min. So it's a little tricky to type it. I'm going to click right here, shift control down arrow. I'm going to close up the max, and then right up here I'm going to type minus, and I'm up in the formula bar. I'm going to type min. Let's see if this works. I click in cell 580, shift control up arrow. It goes one too far. I'm going to run over here and just type the 2, delete 2, and then I got to close this up. So I'm taking a max minus a min. The other point I want to make is if you can sum or max or min different ranges. So here's what this looks like. If I were to just grab some of these numbers, and now I hold down the control key and grab different numbers, what it does has a range, comma, and a separate range. If I hold down the control key again, I can then grab this range. It'll put a comma. So that's a way to grab different ranges, and then it'll add all those up. So now let's go talk about the count functions. They are super handy. I've shortened up our data, and I want to talk about there's 3 different count functions. If you just type equals COU, we're going to talk about count, count A, and count blank, and the tooltip counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. That's super important to understand, because count A counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty, meaning numbers and text. Count blank counts the number of empty cells in a range. That kind of makes sense. Why is that so important to understand? Let's say I want to count how many employees. Well, I type equal count, parenthesis, and it says value 1, value 2. Well, you can drag through a range. So remember what count does? It counts numbers. And so a lot of times students will grab that range. I'm going to close it up and hit enter and go, wait a minute, why am I getting 0? Because these are not numbers. See that dash? That dash means this is a piece of text. Okay, so anytime, just because that looks numerical to you and I, it's not, it's a piece of text in terms of what Excel thinks. So if you want to use that column, you need the count A function. Count A counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So then we'll get the fact that it's 11 employees. So in this case, if your boss said count how many employees, you could use count. That's okay, but then you just have to choose a column that has numerical values in it. So for instance, days of employment. As long as you don't have any blanks, then you could use that and use the count function, and you're going to get the same answer. How many employees are available? Well, if we go equal count, remember, count's only numbers. That's not going to work. I'm going to have to count A, which counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So now I can grab this range, and it will tell me the fact that I got 1, 2, 3, 4 employees that are not available. How many with no sick days? So equal count blank. I want to count how many in here have nothing in that cell. So I'll count the blanks out of that range, and it tells me I got 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 blanks. So finally, I want to, just to emphasize the difference between count and count A, let's take a look at this performance rating. If I go equal count without the A, it's only going to count what? Numbers. And that 5-star is another example of something that is not a number. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 numbers. If I go equal count A, parenthesis, and grab through that range, what's it going to return? It's going to return everything with or without numbers, so meaning text also. So now I get my 11 because I chose count A. The point being, you got to be careful. You have to decide which one of these I'm using and what kind of data am I using it on. And by the way, that count function can also be accessed from this, but notice what it says, count numbers. And so if you click on it, it's putting in the count function, and notice it's trying to guess what it thinks you want to count, which is wrong. So at this point, you could do a different selection, and then it would be okay. So that's it for this video. In the next one, we'll talk about the if function.